Okay, I think it's time to get started. So let's go ahead and do so. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So my name is Mine Çetinkaya-Rundel. I am a professor at Duke University, and I will be talking to you about creating your own website with Quarto today. So let's start with a quick recap of part one of this workshop. And if you are interested, if you haven't attended the part one of this workshop, which was some time ago, so I totally understand even if you have, you may not remember. I've shared the link to the slides for that. I don't recommend that you try to go through them all right now, but I figured that folks might be interested in having access to them. So as a quick reminder, Quarto is a new open source scientific and technical publishing system. And the goal of Quarto is to make the process of creating and collaborating dramatically better. So as this little schematic shows you, in a Quarto document, we have code cells that can have computation natively in R, Python, Observable, or Julia. And the system Quarto itself is designed to actually be extensible to include other languages as well. And outcomes are beautifully formatted HTML, PDF, Word, or many other output types of documents. For those of you who are R and particularly R Markdown users, I can summarize Quarto as both unifying and extending the R Markdown ecosystem. So what do I mean by that? It unifies it for people who love R Markdown, and it extends it people for who don't know R Markdown. If you have been an R Markdown user, you've probably loved the fact that as you know, different features got implemented along the way. R Markdown has been around for over a decade now, and over this time, we've gained a lot of features for it. For example, you couldn't necessarily easily do tab sets in your documents early on, and now that's possible. You can have code folding, you can have syntax highlighting. But one of the pain points has been that these have been available in some output formats and not others. The implementation of R Markdown has been that each new output generally came with a new R package. For example, to make websites, you need to learn blog down, or distill to write a book, you need to learn book down. And a lot of the things were consistent between these packages, but some things weren't. And so if you were sort of like a power user of R Markdown, inevitably you got to these corners of the ecosystem where you felt like you can do something in one and not the other. And that has been frustrating a little bit. So Quarto sort of unifies that and makes that available with a consistent syntax across all output formats. It also has more accessible defaults as well as better support for accessibility. And it has guardrails, which are particularly helpful for new learners. For example, YAML completion or informative syntax errors, both of which we're going to demonstrate today a little bit. And additionally, it has support for other languages like Python, Julia, Observable, and more via the Jupyter engine for executable code chunks. If you are an R and Python, as well as R Markdown user, you may have used Python code cells in your R Markdown documents, and that was generally powered by the Reticulate package. So you still needed to have R running on your system, are available on your system, and the Reticulate package sort of did the translation between the two. The difference with Quarto is that it natively allows for these code cells. So if you are a Python user, you don't need to also have R installed or a specific R package in order to be able to render these documents. My goal today is, as much as possible in the hour we have, to meet you where you are. So these materials that I'll be going through are pitched at someone who knows some R and Quarto a little bit, has worked in our studio before, and wants to learn more about Quarto. And I'm going to teach you more Quarto, how to create a website with Quarto, and how to publish your website. That's our goal today. So let's think about going from a single document in Quarto to Quarto projects. The anatomy of a quarto document is that it has three components. On top, it has some metadata, which is what we call the YAML of the document, where you have fields like title, author, things like that, just like with our Markdown. And then we can have some text in our document that's authored with Markdown, and some code cells, which can be executed with Jupyter or Knitr, depending on whether you're using Python or Julia, or Observable, or R code. We weave it all together, and you have a beautiful, powerful, and useful output. Well, a Quarto project is a directory that contains a file called quarto.yaml. So here is a Quarto project. I have a single file here, in this case, in this example, in a Python notebook, and I have a YAML file along with that as well. And this is not a Quarto project because in this folder, I only have a file and I don't have a Quarto YAML folder. So what is in this Quarto YAML file? It has particular keys and values that Quarto recognizes. And if you have any unrecognized keys, Quarto will happily ignore them instead of erroring out. For example, here is a project with the title, a bare bones project, and there's nothing else to this right now, a very minimal Quarto YAML file. And here is something entirely extensive. This is the Quarto YAML file for the documentation site of Quarto, which has hundreds and hundreds of pages. So you can see that each one of those pages are basically listed here in the navigation. And we also have some additional preferences along with that as well. So we said that Quarto projects start with need to have a Quarto YAML file, and one of the fields, an important field in that file, is the type field. And this can take on one of four values. The default value, which basically says this folder is a collection of documents, and we want to be able to render them all at once. A website or a blog, which is what we're going to talk about today, a book, or it can be a manuscript. And this is a new Quarto feature that will be available, that is available currently in the Quarto 1.4 pre-release. And that version of Quarto should be officially released come early next year, so January or so. And that the manuscript type basically allows for multiple notebooks and files to live in a single folder that create a journal manuscript with embedded code cells in them, where you can actually click on the code cell and arrive at the code in a separate notebook that generated the output that's being displayed in that code cell, for example. So today's focus is going to be the website project type. These are essentially a Quarto files with format HTML and a Quarto project file. But how it's different than just a single file with the setting format HTML is that it has multiple pages. So we're bringing together multiple pages together. And websites or books are very similar to each other. So many of the things you're going to be learning about websites today apply to books as well. They're similar in that they associate multiple pages or resources into a connected resource. However, how they're different is that in a book, you can cross-reference between pages. So you can have, for example, in chapter 4 of your book, a figure cross-reference back to chapter 1. So you can have a sentence that reads something like, as figure 1.2 shows, and it will link back to the figure in that chapter. This is currently not possible with websites and cross-referencing. So you can obviously put a direct link to the hosted websites to another page, but cross-referencing within your project to other pages in a website is not possible. Websites and books can look pretty similar to each other. So I encourage you to not necessarily think about books in, like, do I want to write a book today? As in like a long form, textbook or something like that. Obviously, for that type of a project, type book for your Quarto project is the most appropriate one. But you might have other resources that you want to share with others, where combining them in a book format as opposed to a website format might be more appropriate for you. And that might be the case, basically, if you think that you're going to need to cross-reference between pages. All right, so what we're going to do next is actually make a web page. My goal today is for you to have at least created a web page for yourself, or at least seen me create a web page for myself. It's not going to be a very extensive web page, but it's going to be something that can get us started. If you would like to follow along and, you know, actually play with it, you know, creating a web page yourself, my recommendation would be to start here. So that link that I've shared in the chat will get you to a GitHub repository that looks something like this. Basically, what it has is a single index file, and doesn't yet have a quarto YAML in it either, just a single index file with a little bit of personal information, in this case about me. But if you are following along, you can basically edit that to be about you. And if you do want to follow along, my recommendation would be to, if you have a GitHub account, would be to say, use this template to create a new repository. And if you don't have a GitHub account, or you don't want to interact with GitHub in any way, then you can go ahead and say you want to download a zip folder and sort of work locally with it. Just a caveat before we get started is that if you use this template route and create a GitHub repository for yourself and clone it, you will then be able to publish to GitHub pages as well. I'll show you how to do that during this session too. If you choose to simply locally download things and choose not to sort of interact with GitHub in any way, you can still render the web page locally. However, you won't be able to publish to GitHub pages. Basically, in order to be able to do that, the project you're working on needs to be connected to a GitHub repository. The only other prereq basically is that you have R Studio installed, and if you have installed RStudio recently, you will have a version of Quarto available there as well. If you would like to get, if it's been a long time since you have installed RStudio and you are thinking that you may not have the latest version of Quarto installed for you, you can go to the Quarto webpage, and then to get started, and you can go ahead and sort of download and install Quarto from there as well. This is, again, entirely optional. If you have something working already for you, for example, if you have participated in the previous, in part 1 of this workshop, you might very well be in a good place. All right, so what I am going to do is I am going to, let me change the color here real quick. Okay, I am going to go to this project. So what I have done is I've cloned that repository locally, and I have opened the RStudio project. I've done that by double-clicking on this rproj file, and I can see that I'm in the appropriate RStudio project. While this is optional to be sort of using RStudio and projects along with it, you can totally use Quarto outside of RStudio with other editors as well. I think that if you are an RStudio user, you will find it helpful that you're encapsulating your Quarto projects as an RStudio project as well. And this one folder, this Quarto project, or this folder, it's not a project yet, currently has only one QMD, a Quarto Markdown document. It has a title that says about, and then it has some stuff about me. It says I'm a cat lover and something about my education and experience. So let's go ahead and render this. I am going to render things in my preview pane so that we can see sort of the input and output together. And let's do one more thing as well to highlight sort of some features of RStudio that are handy when we're editing Quarto documents. You'll see that I am using the visual editor here. So instead of the source editor where things look like plain Markdown, I am in the visual editor. And what that allows me to do is to use this insert anything tool, where on a new line, I use the / button on my keyboard, and then I might say I want to insert an image. I'm going to go ahead. In this folder, I have an images folder and a headshot of myself. And I might say, let's write some alternative text for it as well. Something like this. And I can go ahead and render that document. So you can imagine this could be the sort of my homepage, right? The landing page of my homepage. So we're going to basically start with this as the basis for our web page and build things out from here. Let's go ahead and see what we're going to do. So this is, I'm starting with a landing page, index.qmd, and I've provided one for you if you're following along with my information that you can replace with yours. Let's go ahead and now make this a quarto project. How do we do that? We create a new file called _quarto.yaml in here. So I'm going to say new text file, and I will name that _quarto.yml. This is a quarto project. And you can see that I'm using YAML completion. As soon as I hit tab, RStudio gives me some options for things that I might write here. The type of it is website. And on this website, I would like a, let's give it a title. I'm going to call my title MCR, my initials. I am also going to go ahead and for a second turn off this option I have, which makes suggestions for me for my code with GitHub Copilot, just so that is not confusing us with the YAML completion. So I've turned that off now, and I have a title for my website. And then let's say that I want a navigation bar where on the left, the one thing I want linked is this index.qmd file. So that's the only file that I have, and I want to put a navigation bar for my website. I have created a Quarto YAML file, but currently I don't have a button in RStudio to sort of build everything together. I have a render button for my index.qmd file, but I don't want to work with an individual file anymore. I'm in a project mindset at this point, and I want to sort of render everything together. So I am going to reload RStudio one more time. I could do this by closing RStudio and reopening it, or I can go to the project menu and simply choose the project that I'm working on again so that it refreshes RStudio. And when I do, you'll see that I gained a new tab here, a build tab. And the way RStudio knows to bring this for me is that I have a Quarto YAML file that tells RStudio, hey, we're writing a project now. And because my project type is website, RStudio has given me the facility to click a button and hit render website. So let's go ahead and hit render website. And I only have one page on my website, and this is what my website looks like. Not that different from what I had previously with a single page, but you can see that I have this navigation bar here, and that navigation bar is where I can add other pieces of information, other pages as well to my web page. So we now have a web page with a navigation bar on top and a single page in it. In order to make this whole effort worthwhile, let's go ahead and create one more page. So let's go back to RStudio and say, I want a new Quarto document. How about, since I'm making a personal web page, I'm going to call this projects. I don't really need it to say format HTML here anymore because I'm in a website format anyway. So everything is, all the pages are known to render to HTML, but we can go ahead and leave that there for now. And the other piece of information here in my YAML is saying that when we open this document, we should open it in the visual editor as opposed to the source editor. This is something I can decide on at the file level, or it could be something that I decide on at the project level, where I say that I want to use the visual editor for all of the pages on my website. So for each of the files, when I open them, I want RStudio to open them with the visual editor. Let's go ahead and save this file as projects.qmd, and maybe let's list some projects. What are some projects that I work on? One of the projects I work on is the Open Intro project, and maybe something I might want to do is go to the Open Intro web page, click its URL, and I could do something like, let's go ahead and insert a link to it. And I probably would want to say some text about what that web page is, something like that. And then maybe I also work on the Quarto project, so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into the details of my sort of like personal details here, but the goal here is to realize that I have created a file with some additional information here. However, currently, this Quarto website has no way of knowing that I want this file to be part of my web page. So how do I make it part of my web page? I go to Quarto YAML and I say, let's also add a link to projects.qmd as well. And let's go ahead and render this website one more time. So now you can see, if I pop this out at full length, full width, I have my about page and I have my projects page here as well. So this is how easy it is to add new content and to your web page. Create a new page and then tell Quarto that you want that included by adding it to your YAML. Go ahead and get rid of those. And let's go back and sort of like see what else we need to do. So we added one more page. And we said, let's next go ahead and explore navigation options. So on this particular web page, my navigation is happening on the top bar. So I go between pages by clicking on items on my top bar. I might want to do it on the sidebar as well. How do I go ahead and change that? I would change in Quarto YAML from navbar to sidebar. And then instead of left, saying list these on the left, I would say something like contents. And let's go ahead and render that. You can actually see that RStudio is doing this live rendering for me. As soon as I save it, it changes things for me. So now I have a web page that looks like this. I actually have my 2 pages that I have included here. One of the things I like with Quarto pages, and this is available both the sidebar view and the nav bar view, is this: you get this search bar by default. You can turn it off if you like, but I think it's really handy. So soon as you start typing here, it can go through and browse through your pages to see and will bring up for you any of the matches for any character string that you're looking for. In this really limited web page, that search function is not that, it's hard to highlight how useful it might be, but let's give it another try. Let's go to my course webpage from this semester. One of the course I'm teaching is a Stat 101 course. So you can see that I'm using a sidebar sidebar layout of a Quarto web page here. And let's see how many places the word regression shows up. So as soon as I start looking for regression, you can see that it finds all the sort of matches for me. And some of these are even in slide decks, and it will bring you exactly to that slide deck. So to me, that's a really handy feature that it can search through all of the documents in your web page, regardless of how extensive your web page might be. Whether you use a sidebar or a nav bar layout is entirely up to you. It's really an aesthetic preference at that point. However, one thing to also note is that as your web page gets more extensive, you may want to use a combination of these. As an example, let's take a look at the Quarto documentation website at quarto.org. Here we can see, for example, that on the landing page, I have a nav bar on top. However, if I click on guide, I get an additional sidebar. And then if I click on another page, say like reference, I get a different sidebar. So here we have a hybrid navigation situation happening where we're using both nav bar and sidebar together. When might you want to worry about something like this? I would say when you have many things that you want to expose on your web page, and particularly if they need to sort of be deeply nested. For making a personal web page, my guess is either a sidebar or a nav bar navigation will be fine. I'm going to make this back to a nav bar. And save it, and we can see the live rendering that it's updating it for me. Another thing okay, so let's take a look at our list of things. Okay, so the next thing we might want to think about is themes. This is the default theme for Quarto. However, maybe you're not so fond of that blue on top, or maybe you want to use something else. If you are interested in customizing your theme, all the way down to the fonts, the colors, and everything, all of that is absolutely possible. But we only have an hour today, so we don't really have time to get into the details of writing CSS for your web page for styling things. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see, could we leverage an existing theme that might look nice enough for us? So Quarto leverages Bootswatch themes. So let's go to the Quarto webpage. And this way I can demo for you how I sort of find my way around as I am building things with Quarto as well. I'm going to use the handy search bar here, and I'm going to look for the word theme. And reveal is about slide decks. We're not making a slide deck right now, so I'm going to go to HTML theming. And basically, here's a list of 25 themes from the Bootswatch project that we can use, Quarto says. We are using the default theme right now. I'd like to change it to something very different so that it's very obvious what the changes look like. So I am going to instead use the sketchy theme. How do we go about doing this? We go back to our Quarto YAML. We say that we want our format to be HTML. I didn't have to say that before because that was the default anyway, but now I want to customize what I want to do in this format. So in here, I will say that I would like my theme to be sketchy. So we can see that the theme of my web page changed, and it looks entirely different, honestly, compared to what I have before. We can change it to something even more different just to sort of take a look. So here's the quartz theme, for example. So you can browse through these options and see which one you like. And if you like any one of them as a sort of the way it's already been styled for you, you're in a pretty good starting place. And maybe you don't need to do more for your theming. This is way too much color for me. So how about we go back to something maybe with a little less color. So I'm going to use the minty theme for the time being. All right. Let's go back to our notes to see what's next. So now I have a web page. I have a web page with a landing page, some information about myself, and then a second page. So I have achieved my goal of building a Quarto project that brings multiple pages together. From this point onwards, whether you have 2 pages or 10 pages, how you publish your web page is exactly the same. So let's go ahead and give things a try. In order to publish my web page, I can do one of 2 things. So first of all, let's take a look to see where is my web page. Soon as I hit render website, what happens is Quarto creates or updates the contents of this folder called _site. So in here, you can see that I have an index.html, which is my landing page, and my projects.html, and any images or additional sort of libraries that are needed to serve this web page are included here as well. If you are a person who has a way of hosting HTML files someplace, so for example, this could be your departmental server or something like that, to make a web page for yourself, you could grab the contents of this _site file and be done. However, if you would like to take this project and publish directly from here, we can leverage some Quarto commands. And here, let's pause and get back to that idea of we can run Quarto sort of independent of R, right? Quarto is not an R package, it's a command line interface. And because it's a command line interface, we can interface with it by running some commands on the terminal. So I'm going to go to the terminal and I'm going to say Quarto. All of my Quarto commands start with the word Quarto, and I want to publish this web page. And Quarto gives me a few options for doing so. I can publish on Quarto Pub, which is a static hosting service for Quarto projects. It's free to use as long as your project isn't huge. And I would say the definition of huge is pretty generous. As long as you're not hosting like big video files and stuff, you might be able to just host your web page there. If you have a GitHub repository associated with your project and you want to publish on GitHub, then publishing on GitHub Pages is an option as well. Posit Connect is a pro product of Posit, the company. Netlify is another web hosting service, and Confluence is a sort of a wiki type tool that a lot of organizations use, so you can publish directly there as well. The two that we're going to talk about today are Quarto Pub and GitHub Pages. So let's start with GitHub Pages for those of you who actually created your project from a GitHub repository and might just want to host it there. So I'm going to select GitHub Pages, and it asks me, would you like to publish the site address? I'm going to say yes. If this is the first time that you're doing it, it might ask you for some authentication. But otherwise, it's basically saying, well, this repository is already connected with this project, so it's going to go ahead and publish it there. I'm going to let that run for a second, and then we're going to take a look at the other publishing approach as well, for those of you who might choose to either not host your projects on GitHub, or perhaps you just might an alternate venue for publishing things. So right now, it's doing under the hood the necessary steps to create what we call a GH Pages branch, a GitHub Pages branch in your GitHub repository, and it's pushing all of the files there. It's important to note that the rendering is happening locally. So I'm not running any sort of code or building this web page on the GitHub servers. It's rendering your web page locally, just like it does when you click on render website, and then it's simply pushing the files to the GH Pages branch of your GitHub repository. All right, let's see if, while this is deploying, if you have any questions so far, feel free to place those in the Q&A window, and I can try to answer them as we go along as well. So great question. One of the questions is, if we hosted the GitHub repository as private, will that cause issues for publishing the site? I believe it depends. So if you are a pro GitHub user, and pro doesn't mean you have paid for it. If you have student or faculty status, you can get GitHub Pro for free as part of their educational benefits. But if you are a pro user, I believe that's a requirement to be able to publish a public website from a private repository. So the issue will be that your published web page will be public. I believe there's not a way of making your GitHub Pages a private sort of URL, that because there's no authentication there. However, you can do that if you have the pro status. Otherwise, it might error out and tell you you can't do that. The other question was, is the search function for the entire project or the current level web page? It's for the entire project. So when I say entire project, I mean this entire folder here. So what that means is that it's going to be able to search any of the files, QMD or IPyMD or RMD or .md files that are in this project, but it's not going to reach outside of that project. So it's not reaching your entire computer. All right, I don't know why this is taking a little bit of time here. I would have expected this to be done by now. I want to stop this for a second. And let's try one more thing. So while for some reason it's taking a minute to publish to GitHub Pages, let's try Quarto publish again. And now let's say that I want to publish to a new destination. So let's go ahead and say I want to add a new destination. And this time I want to try Quarto Pub. So at this point, if you don't have a Quarto Pub account, it's going to ask you to create one. Because I do have one, it brings that up for me. And it asks me, what should your site name be? I am just going to use another name and say MCR Demo NIS or something like that, just so I don't accidentally overwrite another web page that I might have there. And right now it's rendering my project for publish locally, and then it is updating my Quarto Pub webpage. So you can see that I now have a URL that I can share with everyone that has the content that we created so far. So that is how easy it is to get your project published. I don't know why the GitHub publishing was taking some time, but probably some sort of hiccup, perhaps with the GitHub server. But we can basically see that the publishing works. Another question that came was, does Quarto use MathJax or KTech? You can choose. So by default, it uses MathJax, but you can choose which, let's see here, with which math rendering engine you want to use. I was trying to look to see what the exact YAML option for that is, but that is a choice that you can make. And sometimes I find that it's helpful to go between the two things, and just to make sure it's working for the stuff that you are wanting to render. Okay. So we have a web page now. It's pretty bare bones, but at least we have something going for us. And now what do? Let's go ahead and style things a little bit. So Quarto has this notion of an about page that's nicely styled for you. And I basically have an about page, but I'd like to leverage the fact that, the layout of this about page looks a little bit funny right now. So I am going to, in my YAML, say, I actually want to make this an about page. And I have a few templates that I can choose from. I'm going to just choose one of these. I'll show you in a second what the different looks look like. And let's also add my image. This was in the images folder, mina.png. So I'm going to delete that file from there. And let's go ahead and render this real quick to see what that looks like. So you can see that now I have things styled a certain way, and you may have seen sort of about pages of folks who have personal websites look something like this. So the different options that I have for the templates, we can try another one. Let's go ahead and render this again. Did this change at all? Yeah, there we go. So we have something slightly different. So you can decide which of these looks you like. If you look at the documentation of Quarto, sorry, about pages. Here we go. You can take a look at the different styles and decide which one is one that works for you. I think I like this trussels one, so I'm going to go ahead with that one. And other things that I can do here is add things like links. So I'm going to add an icon, maybe my Mastodon account. I can give it a text. And then I can give it a URL as well. I'm going to go ahead and cheat and copy that over. And let's add one more. I'll add my GitHub icon. X says GitHub. And then my, I might point this to my GitHub account. So you can add sort of like a variety of socials here. And let's go ahead and render this again. So now you can see that my web page, my landing page looks something like this. I didn't have to worry about sort of just like changing things up. It does the layout for me, and I can simply leverage that. All right. Next, let's talk about another feature called listings. So what listings does for us is it enables us to automatically generate contents of a page or region of a page from a list of Quarto documents or other custom data. This is pretty helpful for creating blogs, providing navigation for a large number of documents, or any other scenario where you'd like the contents of a page to be sort of like automatically put together. For example, remember that projects page we did where I started sort of like itemizing different projects I work on? I could imagine having a different page for each one of those, and basically, you know, saying that I would like to bring them all together as listings, so that I sort of leverage an automatic layout. So let's go ahead and do that. In order to do that, we're going to do this in the context of a blog, but again, it doesn't have to be a blog. It could be a collection of the courses you teach. It could be a collection of papers or projects you work on. And we're going to use this opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about how do we bring computation into these projects as well. So I am going to write 2 blog posts. I'm going to create a new Quarto document, and let's call this penguins, for example. And the important thing here is that I am going to say some things about penguins. And I'm going to add an R chunk here, and let's load this library and maybe do something like head, so that it shows us, you know, just the goal is to add a computational chunk here. So let's go ahead and call this penguins, and let's render this document to see what that looks like. Say this is my blog post, okay? And then let's write one more post. I'm going to create another document. I will call this cars. Once again, this becomes redundant because I've already said these things, format and editor choice in my Quarto YAML. So I'm just cleaning that up. And on this blog post, I will say some things about cars. So let's insert a chunk. Maybe I make a nicer table this time. And maybe, since there was a question about math as well, let's add some math too. And let's say I want to do display math, and bar X is ... How about we do something like this. X1. I can't type fast enough. Let's say that there was maybe only 2 things, and I have something like this, okay? Just to have some math in here as well. So the question about MathJax or KTech, so by default, this is going to use MathJax basically. And then another question that came up in the chat is whether Quarto has most of the functionality of Hugo, and I would say yes. There may be sort of corners of Hugo functionality that Quarto doesn't have, but I think the goal is to sort of have coverage to have most of that functionality. I also want to say that I am not a expert on Hugo. I've always found it to be a little bit confusing, to be perfectly honest. So there may be some, again, corners of functionality that I might be missing. Okay, so I have these two, blog posts, but what I am not going to do is to add them into my Quarto YAML. Instead, I'm going to create a new folder called posts here so that I can collect my blog posts. So these two things, move them into this posts folder, and I am going to create one more document, title it blog. And on this document, I will say that I want a listing. And the contents of this listing is going to come from the posts folder. Let's call this blog.qmd. And that I actually do want to include in my navigation. And let's go ahead and render this website. And when we do, we can see that I have a third page now called blog, and it actually has the two blog posts that I have written. It looks pretty bare bones here, but we can add a little bit to these blog posts. So in order to, let's open up one of these for my penguins. Let's go ahead and add another code chunk that maybe does a plot of, okay, I don't know that I can write base R code on the fly anymore. So how about we do this, penguins, fill depth and then maybe let's make a histogram of this. Let's see if this renders. Very good. So we have one image basically here. And then for my cars, let's add something here as well. Another chunk that basically maybe plots cars. I guess that's not MP cars. So let's do this. So I have images for both of these. So two plots that got created for them. So when I go ahead and render my web page and go to the blog page one more time, I can see that those images actually got pulled here. So by using the listings feature, I am able to actually go in and leverage the fact that I have these default sort of layout options, and I'm able to not have to worry about creating this sort of page myself. And there are different layouts that I can use. So one of the other things that I can do over here, I was using the default layout. I could do something like a different layout option for my blog. And let's go ahead and take a look at this. So now things look like a grid. So different cards is what they look like. All right. So let me go through and clean these up. So I think we answered that one as well. Very good question. Can we embed PDFs or other types of downloadable files? Absolutely. You can add any sort of files into sort of like into your Quarto project, and then you can link to them. And another thing that might be interesting to sort of show is that, let's say that for this blog post, I had, obviously I wanted it to be HTML format since that's a web page. But I can also say that I want multiple formats for this blog post. So when I go ahead and render this web page, I should be able to see that I get both the HTML and the PDF available to me. You can see my background jobs pane that the PDF is running as well. So now I actually have a downloadable PDF version of that blog post I wrote too. So you can imagine having sort of like long form writing. This is something I use for course notes, for example, where others can simply download the PDF as well. All right, now finally, let's talk about computations. So one of the things that you saw is that I included computations in my blog posts here. And when I was rendering, things started to take a little bit longer. So the question you might want to answer is like, when should code be rerun? You might have a reason to rerun all code in a Quarto website, every single cell and every single document every time you render the website. But chances are you don't want that, right? If you're just playing around with styling, you probably don't want to run the code at all. If you change something in a document, you probably want to rerun the code in that document, but not the other ones. And if you made a big change affecting computations across many pages, then you maybe want to re-render all of the code. So you have two options for taking control of when computations are rerun. And these options are called freeze and cache. So the freeze option controls when and if computational documents are going to be rendered. True is if you hit render project, it doesn't re-render your computations. You have to click on render on the individual documents. Auto is if the source code in a page changes, so it watches when that file last changed, it re-renders, otherwise it doesn't. That's probably the type that I use the most often. And freeze false says always re-render, which is the default, which is why we were seeing that every time I rendered my page, the R code was running again. We usually add this freeze option typically to a metadata.yaml file within a specific directory to say to Quarto what to do about that directory. So for blogs, for example, we would set freeze, I have a typo here, it should say freeze in the underscore metadata YAML file at the root of the posts directory. And we can have it in sort of like specific subdirectories like this in more complex sites. Let me skip over that for a second. The cache stores the results of computations for a specific file, and cache invalidation is triggered by changing in this chunk source code. Note that it's not by changing in like input data or anything, but in chunk source code. And cache can be set at the chunk level, which can be particularly expensive for, useful for computationally expensive code chunks. So freeze, think about it for sort of directories versus cache for an individual document or for an individual code chunk in a document. So let's go ahead and add this to as the last step of our web page. So I am going to create a new document called metadata.yaml, and save that in my posts folder. And over here, I will say that my execute option is freeze auto. So I'm setting it to auto, which means that if I touch a document, it should rerun the computation in it, and otherwise it shouldn't. So let's go ahead and render this project one more time. And I've purposefully gone to my background jobs pane, and I'd like you to watch to see what's happening here. The first time I render the web page with freeze set to auto, it's actually running through all my code chunks one more time. Those red text that we're seeing is knitter messaging saying the code chunks are running. And what happened is I gained a in my, where is this? Okay, so let's go ahead and run this one more time. Let's go ahead and render the web page one more time. Oh, I have a typo, and that's why it is actually not doing what I expected. I had misspelled freeze, so let's do this one more time. We're seeing the code run again. and it should be freezing the computations. And therefore, in the root of my directory, I gained a new folder called _freeze. And in it, I have my pulse folder, and my computational results for the code chunks are actually stored here. But I haven't now touched those files one more time. So when I go to render the web page again, you can see that it's not running through my code chunks again and again. So basically, unless I make a change in the source code, so let's actually change something in the source code of a page that has computation and render again, it should run the code in that file, but not the other file that had computations in it. So that's basically what the freeze is allowing us to do. Another question that came in is PDF support built in, or is it via Pandoc? It's via Pandoc, but Quarto relies on Pandoc sort of overall anyway. So when you install Quarto, you get sort of Pandoc along with it. So in a way, it is built in. You're not having to do anything sort of additional to be able to render to PDF. It also uses LaTeX by default. And so when you install Quarto, it comes with a, TeX by default, and it comes with a distribution of Tiny TeX too, if you don't have otherwise TeX set up on your computer. All right, so to wrap things up, if you would like to learn more about making websites, the Quarto documentation on websites is pretty extensive on the documentation site. There are a bunch of tutorials there as well. And we've really only scratched the surface of creating websites with Quarto, but we've been able to show you a few of the important and handy features of it, hopefully. The slides for this session can be found at the link that's sort of visible at the bottom of my slides as well. And I will share that on the chat just so you can have it as a reference. The starter repository is also linked here. And you can see the, actually our published website is now different. It's not the GitHub pages because it wasn't working for us, but instead we have a Quarto pub webpage that I shared the link with you earlier on. Thank you so much. And if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take those in the remaining minute that we have.